evaluation of the meeting. And I would like to start with the word of the day, think ahead. Because I think ahead is a wonderful way to actually frame a general evaluation for tonight's meeting. For example, if you're going to do a strip show on the stage, you know.
Disaster.
Think ahead about where you're going to leave your laundry. Don't just leave it on the podium. Send it back to your wife. Think ahead always. But I would like to talk about this idea of thinking ahead, because we're going to do a lot of this in this general evaluation. Because when we're planning these meetings, we have to do a lot of that. We have to do a lot of preparation. Clara and Karen have to combine together to think ahead about how they can create a good, solid meeting. And they have to come up with a wonderful agenda, which is what they've done. However, when we look at that agenda, we need to think ahead about, is that agenda correct? Because when I walked in here and I was running through the timing rules with Jialing, because I think it's her first time being a timer, correct? Second time. But when I'm running through the timing rules with Jialing, I noticed on the agenda that we had 2 icebreaker speeches, and yet on the agenda, they were indicated as 5 to 7 minutes, not 4 to 6. I understand this is a small thing, but it's these small things that make great clubs. So we need to think ahead about that agenda. Is that agenda correct? And then the TME should also be looking at that agenda and thinking ahead about, oh, is the agenda correct? And if the agenda is incorrect, say to the people, by the way, today we have 2 icebreaker speeches, and although they are indicated on the agenda being 5 to 7 minutes, they're actually only 4 to 6. And so that's how we will time. To let everybody know what's going on, because we have a lot of new members over here. But one thing I would like to say about Kwan as well, and what Eric said about me, is about how we honor people before they come onto the stage. Clearly, Kwan thought ahead about how he was going to introduce every single speaker. He thought clearly and he thought precisely about the things he was going to say about them. And he honored every speaker who came onto the stage. And that is a lost art in hosting meetings. Very often I go to Toastmasters meetings and they are just completely random, like, oh yeah, by the way, there's this person coming up over here, and no real context to that person. No understanding of who that person is. And I like the way Kwan thought ahead about Ting Ting. Because we've only met Ting Ting once or twice. As I said, this is her first meeting as an official member, and she's coming up here and doing a icebreaker speech. So it's kind of easy for me to introduce Alice or Janie. I've known them for 10 years. But when we don't know somebody, but Kwan clearly thought ahead. How am I going to introduce this new member to our club? And he introduced her beautifully and he honored her. So thank you for that, Kwan, thinking ahead. The second thing I'd like to look at is our table topic session. Clearly, Clara thought ahead about the table topic session. It was related to the theme. Too often we go into a Toastmasters meeting and then they'll have one theme on the right, but on the left, the table topics will be completely unrelated and you're like, why are you doing this theme? But I like the way Clara thought ahead. She had prepared little pictures of potential disasters, thinking ahead about maybe people are going to get stuck on the concept of what's a disaster. But a couple of areas we can do better in table topics is think ahead about how you're going to introduce those things, not in between speeches, but before. These are potential disasters. And then also thinking ahead a little bit more clearly about who you're going to call for those questions. For example, I think the very first person you called was Kiki, who was the language evaluator. So thinking ahead and looking at the agenda and saying who's on the agenda, who's not on the agenda. I think this is a very important point when we are preparing a session like the table topic session, thinking ahead. The third thing I'd like to emphasize is the way we greet people when they come in the door. And this is especially pertinent to people who are coming here as assignment takers. We need to think ahead about what time does the meeting start? Oh, the meeting starts at 7:15. That does not mean I get there by 7:14. You know what my mother and my father always used to tell me, Paul, if you're 10 minutes early, you're exactly on time. If you are an assignment taker, think ahead about, okay, the meeting is going to be at 7:15, so let me get there by 7 o'clock so I can get settled in, that the room can be organized, that I can be prepared for my role. So it's not chaos, everybody's coming in. If we are going to be an officer and a leader in this club, let's think ahead about, we need to get here earlier because we have a new person here, Chingu, who's the very first person to arrive. What time did you arrive? What time did you arrive today? 6:40, okay. But maybe that's a little bit early, but maybe we can think ahead. But maybe we can think ahead and say, okay, let's try as officers and organizers be here at 6:45. So if there is somebody who comes early, we can greet them the way they deserve to be greeted, as VIP guests that God Himself has sent into our club. And not just having a big rush mess in the front. We need to think ahead about how we're going to greet people. Not just allow them to walk through and then randomly find a seat. Think ahead about how we're going to make the guests feel comfortable. Think ahead about how we're going to honor the people who have chosen to spend their evening, their valuable Friday nights with us. The last thing I would like to say is to the 4 speakers who spoke tonight, thank you for thinking ahead so clearly about your speeches. Every speech tonight was magnificent. I think today what you showed was the standard of this club is truly very high, especially among our speakers. And for that I thank you, because when you are preparing a speech, you have to spend a lot of time thinking ahead about how you are going to interact with your audience and the message you are sharing. And every single one of our speakers, including our icebreakers, did exactly that. So thank you, speakers, for thinking ahead. Today was a magnificent meeting. Thank you, everybody, for thinking ahead, and let's think ahead to the next meeting.